In the serene, opulent first-class cabin of Stratus Air Flight 917, Celeste Morgan sat in the front row with an unmistakable presence. A poised, commanding black woman radiating quiet power. As the founding CEO of Morgan Tech, a pioneering company in artificial intelligence and data security, Celeste was no stranger to luxury, but she was equally familiar with the scrutinizing, skeptical stares that followed her into spaces deemed not for people like her. Her first-class meal, a steaming lobster bisque followed by a premium steak, had been pre-ordered well in advance. For every international flight, Celeste prepared down to the last detail. Project files, her dress, shoes, and even the meal. For her, everything had to go smoothly, because as a black woman in a position of power, mistakes were a luxury she couldn't afford. But today, something was off. When the flight attendant returned, his expression was strained and his eyes avoided hers as he informed her that her meal was no longer available. Instead, he offered a cold sandwich and a glass of water. She looked around. The other passengers were savoring beluga caviar and Louis Reuterer vintage 2012 champagne. Why was she the only one being overlooked? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where no one said anything overtly offensive, yet everything made you feel unwelcome? Celeste felt it, clearly. This wasn't an innocent mistake, it was a silent message. She didn't belong. The indifference in their eyes, the nonchalant way the substitute meal was handed over, the way the flight attendant's gaze skimmed past her as though she were invisible, it all said the same thing. No one uttered a slur, yet the discrimination cut as cold and sharp as a blade. Celeste didn't need anyone's seat or their praise. She had climbed her way to the top with intellect, grit, and resilience. And that's why she could always tell when she was being pushed to the margins, no matter how sparkling her Italian leather shoes were, or how refined her Cartier watch. This time, though, she wasn't going to let it slide. Do you know what happens when a woman who has been underestimated, sidelined, and dismissed finally says, "Enough"? Celeste Morgan didn't just respond. She ignited a storm of outrage, awakening and resistance that rippled far beyond the walls of first class. Her story didn't just rattle Stratus Air. It forced the entire airline industry to take a long, hard look at itself. And sometimes all it takes to spark a revolution is a cold sandwich. Have you ever faced that moment? The moment you had to choose between staying silent and standing up for what's right? Celeste knew that moment well. She was used to being unseen, the invisible that the world often assigned to women like her, women of color in elite spaces. But she never saw that as a reason to retreat. On the contrary, being overlooked had always been the trigger for change, and this time would be no different. Seat 1A, the most prestigious spot on the plane, offering the best view, the quietest corner, and the most attentive service, was the stage where it would all begin. Seat 1A embraced Celeste in quiet luxury, supple leather, the faint scent of polished oak, and shimmering champagne in a crystal flute, as if the world had been tailored for the powerful. But for Celeste, this pinnacle wasn't a gift. It was a mountain climbed through blood, sweat, and countless rejections and misjudgment. She had flown Stratus Air more times than she could count, and each time she ordered the lobster bisque to start, followed by a medium-rare steak and a glass of Chateau Margaux vintage red. Not to flaunt wealth, but as a ritual, a reminder to herself that she had every right to be there, among those who were defaulted to belong, white men in expensive suits and empty handshakes. Celeste opened her tablet, the blue light reflecting off her sharp eyes. On the screen was the merger agreement between Morgan Tech and a Swiss data security conglomerate. This wasn't just a multi-billion-dollar deal. It was the strategic move she'd been planning for 2 years to reshape her global influence. In that quiet cabin, she didn't need to glance at the menu. Everything had been arranged in advance, just as any VIP would expect. Then came the footsteps, soft, steady, cold. A woman's voice followed, calm enough to send a chill down your spine. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Becky. I'll be taking care of you during this flight." Celeste looked up. A pale face, blonde hair neatly tied back, a polite but soulless smile, and eyes that didn't bother to hide the judgment, scanning her from blazer to shoes to the delicate gold ring on her finger. "You received my meal request from last week, correct?" Celeste asked, her voice calm but firm enough to command respect. Becky flinched slightly. She smiled thinly and nodded, as if only now realizing who she was speaking to. "Yes, of course. We'll begin service once we reach cruising altitude." Then she turned away, leaving behind a faint, nearly imperceptible smirk, a quiet insult, carefully disguised. Celine frowned. There was something in Becky's voice and footsteps that felt familiar, like an echo of past experiences, moments of being underestimated, excluded, or made to feel like a stranger in places of prestige. Have you ever encountered someone whose mere voice unsettled an entire room? And if you have, what would you do? Stay silent or brace yourself for confrontation? This flight had only just begun, and all signs pointed to it being anything but ordinary. Not because Celeste knew the woman, but because she'd encountered far too many people like Becky, the ones who dressed their behavior in exaggerated politeness while clinging to the belief that power comes in only one skin tone. Moments later, a male flight attendant named Daniel passed by. He dipped his head respectfully and greeted 3 white passengers seated behind Celeste by name. "Good afternoon, Mr. Radcliffe, Mr. Malcolm, and Mr. Clayton. It's an honor to serve you today." Soft chuckles followed, accompanied by the bright clink of glasses. A deep male voice called out, "Starting a flight with beluga caviar? This is going to be one hell of a journey." Celeste didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The chill running down her spine said enough. For the first time in years, she felt the sharp edge of that invisible line drawn so delicately between first class and the feeling of truly belonging. A line no one spoke of, yet everyone knew. She lowered her tablet, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest, each tap a drumbeat, signaling a storm on the horizon. And if Becky believed that a meal could define someone's worth, the woman in seat 1A was about to prove how wrong she was. The soft clicks of high heels on carpet grew louder. Celeste looked up to see Becky Whitmore, makeup applied with care, just enough to appear polished, but not enough to hide the cold in her eyes. She stopped beside her, holding an uncovered tray. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Becky said evenly, without regret or remorse. "We've run out of premium meals. All we have left is a cold chicken sandwich and water." Celeste narrowed her eyes, turning fully to face her. "I pre-ordered my meal last week. I have an email confirmation, a booking code, and even a reminder text from Stratus," she said, calm, but razor sharp, like someone long used to facing bias and cutting through it. Becky shrugged. The notepad in her hand fluttered like none of it really mattered. Sometimes the system doesn't update. Happens all the time. She turned away, no apology, not even a glance back. The world around Celeste faded. The hum of conversation, the golden light glinting off crystal, the bustle of the first-class cabin, all blurring into the background. All that remained was a heavy silence and the cold sandwich in front of her. A quiet slap in the face. A denial of her very presence. She watched Becky's upright figure stride away. Not the walk of someone who'd made a mistake, but of someone who had done exactly what she intended. There was no guilt, only the arrogant assumption that Celeste wouldn't dare speak up. Worse, that she didn't deserve to be treated any differently. What do you think? Would a woman who's broken global tech barriers stay silent in the face of a cold sandwich and a condescending glance? That silence wouldn't last long. Celeste's eyes scanned the cabin, taking in a world too accustomed to ignoring women like her. The white men behind her still raised their champagne glasses, deep in lively discussion about the Asian markets, cryptocurrency, stock strategies. No one noticed anything out of place. Or perhaps, more accurately, they were used to women like Celeste being pushed aside. Another flight attendant, Daniel Clinet, passed by again, stopping with reverence at seats 1C and 1D. "We're honored to serve Mr. Radcliffe, Mr. Malcolm, and Mr. Clayton on today's flight. Caviar, hot towels, and champagne followed, but not a single word was directed towards Celeste. No one asked if she needed anything. No one even looked at her. Have you ever been exactly where you belonged, yet treated like you didn't? Celeste, the only black woman in the cabin, dealt a dismal tray of food as if she'd stumbled into economy by mistake, when in reality she was someone who had earned her place through intellect, resilience, and victories that were both personal and global in scale. But Celeste Morgan was not someone who backed down. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't argue. But beneath her composed exterior, a storm was brewing, quiet, steady, and unstoppable. And Becky Whitmore, with her hollow smile and careless gaze, had no idea what she had just ignited. The dull silver tray in front of Celeste became a symbol, a quiet rejection made visible. On it sat a cold chicken sandwich sagging between two dry slices of bread, a few wilted pieces of lettuce, a cheap paper napkin, and a half-filled plastic cup of water. No silverware, no linen, not a single indication this was first-class service, let alone the meal for a distinguished CEO preparing to keynote at the European Economic Forum. Celeste sat upright, hands resting neatly on her knees. She didn't touch the tray, not out of pride, but because she needed to fully absorb the insult. She wouldn't turn away from it. She wouldn't forget it. She needed to remember every detail, Becky's expression, the laughter behind her, and the silence of those who watched. Those who sat in power yet couldn't look injustice in the eye. 6 white men, 6 perfectly tailored suits, 6 champagne flutes lifted in unison under the soft glow of the cabin lights. And not a single glance in Celeste's direction. Not one asked why the only black woman in the cabin sat there, alone, with a cold tray of food, as if she had never belonged. But she knew. The memory came rushing back. She remembered the first time she walked into the boardroom at Sterling Capital. She was just 33 then, invited to present the AI security platform she had personally developed. She arrived early, meticulously prepared, dressed professionally, confident. But when the door opened, one white man in the room didn't even bother to look her in the eye. Strange, isn't it? A single averted glance can speak volumes about someone's worldview. That day, in a packed meeting room at Sterling Capital, Celeste entered with all the readiness in the world, and yet one white man, instead of greeting her, turned to his assistant and coolly said, "Would you please get me a coffee?" Celeste didn't get angry. She simply smiled and replied, her voice calm but strong enough to silence the entire room. "I'll get your coffee if you let me present the $15 million 0 cents security proposal right after." From that moment on, no one ever confused who she was again. But not everyone learns that lesson. Becky Whitmore was an embodiment of a generation coddled by privilege, never forced to fight for her place, never dismissed for the color of her skin. She may not have used slurs or profanity, but it was in the shrug of her shoulders, the casual disregard, the unapologetic turn of her back. That's where modern prejudice lived. Quiet, icy, precise as a blade. What do you think? Prejudice today may no longer shout like it once did, but has it become more subtle and more dangerous? Celeste turned her gaze away from the cold tray of food and scanned the first-class cabin. Seats 1C. Radcliffe, CEO of a venture capital firm known for only funding startups from Ivy League founders. He once rejected Morgan Tech, citing lack of executive-level experience. Seat 1D. Malcolm, a strategy analyst, who had once asked publicly at a conference, "Are women of color truly capable of leading in high tech?" C2A Clayton, founder of a financial trading platform, previously accused of harassing a black female employee. The case was never formally investigated. All 3 were now being served meals fit for a Michelin-starred restaurant. And Celeste, the woman in seat 2A, was not. She closed her eyes. What rose inside her wasn't just anger anymore. It was fatigue, the exhaustion of someone who had climbed to the peak through her own effort, only to feel an invisible rope still pulling her backward. A rope called bias. But today, Celeste wasn't just climbing. She was going to tear the whole mountain down. No outburst, no fury, just precision, resolve, and something irreversible. She opened her phone, accessed Morgan Tech's internal security management app, equipped with real-time data tracking tools. With a few taps, she pulled up the personnel record linked to the airline's first-class manifest. Name, Rebecca Ann Whitmore. Position, lead flight attendant, Stratus Air. Employee ID, STA 935. The profile loaded. Cracks were already visible. 2 previous passenger complaints for discriminatory behavior. 1 internal email noted, focus more on serving high-tipping passengers. No explicit evidence of bias, but the language was telling, subtle, dangerous. She categorized passengers in her own coded way. Celeste saved everything because this time she wasn't just going to rise above it. She was going to make the system look itself in the mirror. There was no emotion in the encrypted message she sent, but every word landed with the force of armor-piercing rounds. Initiate emergency audit protocol, Flight 917. Attendant ID SDA 935. Response required in 10 minutes. The message was sent to Aaliyah Grant, her trusted executive assistant. This was no longer about a woman named Becky. This was a reckoning for a system that had for too long allowed Beckys to exist without consequence. Celeste turned off her screen. Her eyes no longer drifted toward the tray. She looked straight ahead, where a small cockpit light reflected off the narrow runway path, stretching into the horizon. This flight had become more than literal. It was now a declaration. Bathed in the soft lighting of the first-class cabin, Celeste closed her eyes. But her mind was fully awake, a machine rebooting, gears grinding with quiet intensity. Memories surged like a tidal wave, cold stares, careless words, dismissive looks from the past. She saw herself at 26 delivering her first presentation in Palo Alto, a small room, 7 white men in tucked-in dress shirts, MacBooks open. She walked in with an AI security prototype years ahead of its time. The first question they asked, are you on the tech side or are you a co-founder from marketing? Ever felt like you just stepped into a game where all the cards had already been dealt and the seat you were given was simply what was left over? Celeste had sat in that seat, but she didn't falter. She didn't back down. And 3 years later, that platform was under contract with the Pentagon. She saw herself at 34 at a tech conference in London. A reporter asked, as the first woman of color to make the top 10 CEOs under 40 list, would you say your success comes from luck or gender equity policies? Celeste looked straight at him, her smile as sharp as a blade slipping from its sheath. I believe success comes when you work 3 times harder than others, are doubted 10 times more, and still move forward like nothing can stop you. The cabin lights shifted from warm gold to soft blue. The pilot announced they were now flying over Canadian airspace. 8 hours remained until Geneva. A chime sounded, signaling the start of the main meal service. Daniel Klein, the male flight attendant, began moving down the aisle. Celeste opened her eyes, still seated calmly. She no longer looked at the tray. Her gaze was fixed on the window. Beyond it, an endless night sky. But within her, a battle was taking shape. No gunfire, no shouting, but enough force to shake an entire system. And at the center of that confrontation was Becky. Becky Whitmore wasn't an obvious villain. She didn't scream, didn't use slurs, didn't hurl blatant insults, and that's exactly what made her dangerous. The bias Becky carried had been polished into professional demeanor, hidden behind polite smiles and hollow apologies. What's even more troubling, the system had allowed it. Becky hadn't just survived, she had thrived, rising to the position of senior flight attendant. No obstacles, no warnings, no oversight. Because people like Celeste were too busy surviving to speak up. And Celeste knew this intimately. She recognized the kind of prejudice that didn't echo through office hallways, but seep in like hairline fractures into daily routine. It was the kind of bias that never forgets a white man's name but always forgets yours. The kind that loses your pre-ordered meal but never anyone else's. The kind that doesn't need to shout because its silence says it all. You don't belong. And today, Celeste made a decision. She would no longer stay silent. She tapped gently on her smartwatch. A secure signal was sent to Aaliyah Grant. The message was clear. Run a background check on flight attendant STA 935. Compare behavior against International Air Service Alliance conduct standards. 3 minutes later, the screen displayed a reply. Full personnel file accessed. 2 passenger complaints within the past 12 months. 1 internal reassignment due to unprofessional conduct. No disciplinary action taken. Celeste nodded slightly. Once again, the system had chosen silence. But this time she would make it speak, with evidence, with action, and with an unbreakable will. As Daniel Klein approached her row, Celeste raised her hand slightly, just enough to draw his attention. "I have a question, Mr. Klein," she said, her voice gentle but sharp as steel beneath Stratus Air's silk veneer. Daniel leaned in. "Yes, Ms. Morgan? According to Stratus's internal policy, when a premium meal is pre-ordered and there's a supply shortage, what criteria determine who is prioritized?" she asked, locking eyes with him. Daniel hesitated. "Usually it's based on booking time and frequent flyer status," he replied, clearly flustered. "I'm a Diamond Plus member. I placed my order 7 days ago, confirmed by your system." Celeste's tone remained steady, but every word served as a quiet, undeniable reminder. "I understand. It could have been a system error, or a crew member temporarily prioritized another guest," Daniel mumbled, avoiding her eyes. Celeste said nothing more. She simply smiled politely and turned away. Enough. In that plush first-class cabin, while others still thought this was just another flight, Celeste Morgan was rewriting a chapter of history, not with a speech, not with a camera, but with evidence, with action, and with unwavering resolve. No need for rage, no need to argue, no need to shout to claim her place, because Celeste Morgan had long understood true power doesn't lie in volume, it lies in action, timely, precise, and irreversible. Celeste opened her phone. Her fingers glided over the touchscreen like she was sending a casual message to a friend. But those few lines were a command, a trigger for an internal investigation powerful enough to shake an entire system. Initiate internal audit protocol Flight 917. Pull full crew personnel records. Confirm. Just 6 lines. 6 lines that could end anyone's career. 6 lines that would force Stratus Air's board of directors to stop discussing marketing or service strategies and finally confront the truth they had dodged for far too long. Aaliyah Grant, Celeste's senior executive assistant, was more than a top-tier operations manager. She was trained in corporate-level crisis response. And when she received that message, she didn't ask, "What happened?" or "Are you okay?" She simply replied in true Morgan Tech fashion, "Received. Pull in data now." Celeste slipped her phone into her jacket pocket. No words, no expression. But across the ocean, a network of servers had been awakened. Passenger data, service logs, Stratus Air personnel files. All were being accessed, filtered, and audited according to some of the most advanced security standards in the world. In the first-class cabin, no one knew what was happening. Laughter continued behind her. Radcliffe and Malcolm were debating European digital currencies, while Clayton was lifting his 3rd glass of champagne. Becky Whitmore continued moving through the aisle, flashing a perfectly rehearsed professional smile. But it wasn't real. She kept asking the gentlemen if they needed more hot towels, yet never once looked back at Celeste. In Becky's mind, Celeste had already been categorized as non-essential. Celeste remained still, but her ears took in everything. She noted how Becky beamed when offering Mr. Malcolm a taste of the Airline's chocolate mousse, how she leaned lower than usual while pouring wine for Mr. Radcliffe. how she lightly touched Mr. Clayton's hand when making a toast. Every gesture was intentional, and they were all directed toward one kind of passenger, and it wasn't her. 12 minutes after the initial message had been sent, Celeste's smartwatch gave a subtle vibration. An encrypted message arrived, along with a large PDF file and 2 internal links. She opened the file. The first line stood out in bold. Flight Attendant Behavioral Report. Rebecca N. Whitmore. Employee ID ST9035. Below that, the notes were stark and chilling. May 2023. Complaint from VIP passenger regarding 3 consecutive incorrect meal services. Evidence of favoritism toward passengers of similar socioeconomic status. August 2023. Internal report for unprofessional comments in crew lounge. November 2023. Crew Operations Department recommended temporary suspension due to conduct affecting service reputation. Celeste nodded slightly. What did you see in those lines? A pattern of systemic misconduct, ignored. And this time Celeste wouldn't let it pass. Not because she was a victim, but because she knew if she didn't act today, there would be another Becky on another flight doing the same thing to another woman, making her feel invisible. Each of those incidents ended with the same empty note. No formal disciplinary action taken. Celeste clenched her right hand, fingernails pressing into her palm, yet her face remained composed. No flicker of anger crossed her lips or eyes, just the cold confirmation that she had been right, and they had been wrong. Worse, they had let it keep happening. Becky wasn't just a flawed individual. She was the product of a culture far too accustomed to rationalizing discrimination, with excuses like system errors, workload stress, or lack of concrete evidence. And that culture today would be forced to confront the consequences it had created. Celeste scrolled down to the second attachment, a full crew manifest for Flight 917. She marked 3 names with high complaint frequencies, Becky included. Then she extracted a clause from Stratist's internal code of conduct. Any discriminatory or preferential behavior during service, even without direct verbal evidence, may be subject to disciplinary action if substantiated by repeated patterns of conduct, per aviation industry ethics standards. She smiled, not out of victory, but because she knew that today her silence was no longer a sign of submission. It was strength. She hit send. The full incident report and a formal investigation request were dispatched directly to the CEO of Stratus Air, with copies to 3 legal advisors who had previously helped her win landmark discrimination cases. No press release, no phone calls, no social media posts, just one line, requesting internal investigation of Flight 917 crew. Urgent. She folded her phone shut, closed her eyes, and leaned her head back against the soft leather of her first-class seat. The sky outside remained calm, but beneath those clouds a storm was forming, and Celeste Morgan was its epicenter. On the other side of the world, as Celeste sat in peaceful silence under the dim glow of first class, another woman was shaking the front lines, processing data with a speed that would impress even the most elite cybersecurity professionals. Aliyah Grant, age 29, Celeste's senior executive assistant, was seated inside the 42nd floor office of Morgan Tech Tower in Manhattan. Her natural curls were pinned back neatly, a ritual she followed whenever she entered combat mode. Complete focus. The room was lit only by the glow of LED monitors reflecting off her thick lenses, as the steady clatter of keys echoed like the rapid heartbeat of a high-stakes data pursuit reaching its climax. Celeste didn't need to say much. With a team like hers, one look, one message, was all it took to set the entire system in motion. She didn't need to explain much. A short message, with precisely chosen keywords, was enough for Aliyah to grasp the gravity of the situation. Because between them, trust wasn't measured by how much was said, but by the accuracy of every action. Aliyah accessed the internal analytics dashboard, launched the Security API interface linked to international aviation data, and pulled up global partner records. A line of encrypted code began to run across her screen. In less than 90 seconds, the first wave of data appeared. Rebecca Ann Whitmore, lead flight attendant, Stratus Air, employee ID *ST9035, on board since 2018, confirmed on Flight 917. On the surface, the information seemed routine. But Aliyah didn't stop there. She pulled response files from passengers, combed through complaint histories from flights where Becky had worked over the past 3 years. And that's when irregular patterns began to surface. February 2022, a black first-class passenger was denied pre-ordered wine, no clear reason given. September 2022, 2 Asian passengers were served last despite boarding early. March 2023, an Indian businesswoman pressed the call button 3 times with no response. None of these incidents led to disciplinary action. The system logged the usual excuse: insufficient evidence to process a violation. Aliyah frowned. She knew all too well how reports like these were often blurred out. People like Becky knew exactly how to skirt the thin line of regulations. No shouting, no insults, just cold, calculated indifference toward those she deemed unworthy. And the system had let her operate like that for nearly 6 years. Aliyah opened the Cross-Nexus tool, a proprietary system she and Celeste had developed. It could detect behavioral bias based on voice tone, facial expressions, response times, and interaction levels, with various demographic groups. The results made Aliyah smirk, not in amusement, but in the cool disdain of a seasoned analyst. Bias indicator in service interactions, 87.4%. Repeated biased behavior toward non-white passengers, 15 instances across 36 documented flights. Risk level, high. Organizational culture impact. Recommendation: deep investigation warranted. She tagged all the data, generated an encrypted PDF report, and stored it in the internal evidence archive. Then she submitted it to the command review channel, reserved for incidents with serious implications for strategic partnerships or brand integrity. She attached a brief note: systemic discrimination issue, Flight 917 crew, initiated by Celeste Morgan. Trigger cultural audit. Simultaneously, Aliyah sent a copy to 3 senior executives at Stratus Air, including CEO Charles Edmonds, a longtime ally of Morgan Tech and its tech innovation programs. She knew Edmonds wouldn't ignore anything involving Celeste, not just out of respect, but because he understood when Celeste Morgan takes action, it's never about retaliation. It's about forcing the system to change. Less than 5 minutes later, a notification appeared on Aliyah's screen. Investigation order issued. HR and legal teams will be present upon arrival for immediate assessment. Thank you for clarifying the matter. Aliyah exhaled and leaned back in her chair, fingers laced behind her head. But it wasn't relief. It was the moment in the eye of a storm when you know you're not extinguishing it, you're guiding it toward where it needs to strike. She knew all too well this was only the beginning. Throughout her career alongside Celeste, she had witnessed the CEO dismantle massive banks, ruthless investment firms, and even corrupt politicians. But never, not once, had Celeste activated an emergency protocol signal without just cause. It was 2:00 a.m. in New York. On Flight 917, in Seat 1A, Celeste remained wide awake, and Becky Whitmore, seated in 2C, kept smiling and chatting as if nothing had happened, completely unaware that, from this moment forward, the world around her was beginning to collapse. Celeste gave a small nod, her gaze forged in steel, but her voice calm, like a leader who had long mastered the art of confronting systems rotten from the inside out. There was no need for noise mid-air. She knew everything necessary had already been dispatched. Now every word she spoke was simply to establish position. There was no escape left on the other side. He pressed the flight attendant call button. A soft ding echoed, so subtle it went unnoticed by most, but enough to draw the attention of a lean, silver-haired man in his 50s. His name tag read Daniel Klein. His steps slowed slightly as he neared seat 1A. His eyes dimmed for a beat, as if instinctively sensing that this woman was unlike any passenger he had ever encountered. "I'd like to ask again about the pre-ordered meal," Celeste said, her voice low and steady, like a blade gliding over silk. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. Daniel straightened up, his hand resting lightly on the service tray. "Yes, ma'am." Celeste cut him off. Not sharply, but decisively, like a scalpel slicing straight into the psyche. "I heard Ms. Whitmore mention customer prioritization. Specifically, what did she mean by that?" Daniel hesitated. His eyes darted around as if searching for an exit from what seemed like an innocent question. But he knew this wasn't about the meal. This was a linguistic trap, a statement that could be recalled and possibly used as evidence in a formal investigation. "I think perhaps there was a misunderstanding in communication," Daniel stammered. "We don't have a discriminatory policy. We just consider order timing and availability." Celeste tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp as a razor. "I'm a Diamond Plus member. I ordered my meal 7 days in advance with confirmation via email and reservation code. I'm the only passenger in this cabin who wasn't served a premium meal. Yet Ms. Whitmore referred to customer prioritization. If that's not discrimination, what is it?" Daniel said nothing. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple despite the cabin's cool air. He wasn't foolish enough to deny it, but he also lacked the courage to confront it. Celeste smiled faintly, a smile like a slice of apple carved with a sharp blade. Elegant, deliberate. "No need to answer. I understand now." Daniel gave a small nod before turning and walking away. His steps were quicker than usual, like a fox retreating from the spotlight of interrogation. What he didn't know was that when Celeste Morgan wages a war, she doesn't need to chase anyone. She simply stands her ground and lets the entire system collapse under the weight of truth. Celeste didn't need Daniel's answer to build her case. She already had everything she needed. She tapped her smartwatch again, quickly scanning the update from Aliyah. The investigation order had been approved by the CEO of Stratus. HR and legal would be present at the Geneva airport upon landing. Code red, line 917. Red line, 917. An internal alert code for incidents with the potential to severely impact brand reputation at the strategic level. Per protocol, the entire crew would be monitored upon disembarkation. All onboard video recordings would be preserved and analyzed. An emergency meeting would be held immediately after landing, attended by legal, HR, and regional management. Involved personnel would be placed on immediate suspension within 24 hours. Celeste knew from the moment she hit send on the initial report, the entire domino chain had begun falling, and no one could stop it now. To the back of the cabin, Becky was still chatting with Mr. Radcliffe. With every step she took down the aisle, unaware, she continued to build the case against herself. She didn't know that every interaction, every gesture, even her tone of voice, was being recorded by the AI-integrated camera system in first-class technology, temporarily accessed by Morgan Tech from its aviation partner to protect VIP passenger interests. Celeste exhaled, not in relief, but like someone placing the final stone atop a crumbling tower. This was why she hadn't confronted Becky directly when first insulted. She didn't need a shouting match. She needed a collapse. She opened her tablet and pulled up her personal profile in the Stratus Air Partners system. Everything checked out: 10 consecutive years as a Diamond Plus member, an average of 12 first-class flights per year, one of 50 VIP passengers invited to review service standards the previous year. She marked each item. A perfect record, no emotion, no gaps, not a single detail that could discredit her right to be in that seat. Celeste didn't act out of ego. She acted because she knew if she didn't speak up, Becky would persist. And women like her, black women, founders, entrepreneurs, would remain the forgotten names in a system designed to overlook them. But she couldn't let that cycle repeat. Not while she sat in seat 1A. A seat she had earned through years of rejection, exclusion, and sheer unshakable brilliance. The plane jolted slightly as the pilot announced the beginning of descent. Becky walked past once more. Her eyes glanced across Celeste. Still that blank stare. Still the way she looked through people without ever really seeing them. But this time, it would be the last time. That silent, dismissive look, an expression Celeste Morgan had seen all her career, would finally be forced to speak. The plane touched down with a sharp screech, the sound of rubber grinding against the tarmac echoing like an unspoken signal. Everything would change from this moment on. Celeste opened her eyes. She felt the impact of the landing, her head tilting slightly as if to gauge the shift in air pressure. But in truth, she was listening to the subtle sounds only those who've survived billion-dollar negotiations would recognize. The tires scraping the runway, the passengers' quiet sighs of relief, the hurried footsteps of flight attendants. She didn't rush to unbuckle her seatbelt. Her smartwatch vibrated twice in under a minute, confirmation that every link in the chain was now in place. Elia had just finished sending the behavioral analysis report, including footage from the cabin, evidence of Becky's selective favoritism, disparities in service timing between passenger groups, and a passenger-recorded clip of Becky refusing to serve Celeste her meal. The final message had been sent less than 3 minutes before landing. Just one line. Forward file to the ethics board. Execute at emergency level. Code Geneva 1A. When the aircraft came to a full stop on the runway, Celeste calmly unfastened her seatbelt. No rush, no expression. She stood, adjusted the edge of her blazer, and slung her leather bag over her left shoulder. She stepped into the aisle, steady, unrushed. Behind her, passengers were still fumbling with luggage, chatting, waiting. At the aircraft door, 2 individuals in dark, formal attire were already standing. One was Brandon Ellis, Stratus Air's regional director for Europe. The other, a petite woman with razor-sharp eyes, wore a name tag that read Legal Geneva Office. Both bowed slightly as Celeste exited the cabin. "Welcome, Miss Morgan. We sincerely apologize." Celeste didn't stop. She glanced at them, then spoke clearly enough for both to hear. "No need to apologize. This is only the beginning. No further words, no handshake, no looking back." But behind her, Brandon, the legal rep, straightened up, their expressions shifting instantly. They had read the report. They knew exactly what awaited them behind the curtain of the business class cabin. They understood. This wasn't a service lapse. It was a crack in the and now they were paying the price. At the same time, the crew began exiting through the rear of the aircraft, as was standard. But this time, nothing was standard. Becky Whitmore walked with the crew, maintaining her composed expression as if everything was fine. In her mind, she was already envisioning her usual hotel, a favorite martini, and telling friends about a difficult passenger from Flight 917. She had no idea that at the end of the exit corridor, 3 individuals in black suits from HR and crisis management were waiting. As Becky approached, one of them raised a tablet. On the screen, a message appeared in bold. "From Flight 977 crew, please proceed to emergency briefing room." Becky's face froze for a moment. Her eyes darted, searching for a sign this was a mistake. But Daniel Clenny's silent, steady expression gave her no relief. No one spoke. No one smiled anymore. The shockwave had begun, and she was standing at its epicenter. Meanwhile, in the VIP lounge at Geneva Airport, Celeste Morgan walked through with composed elegance. Her escort staff was ready to take her to the Summit Hotel. The phone in her bag buzzed. Malia's message. "They've begun collecting statements. Whitmore has been suspended. The case will be presented to the board first thing tomorrow." Celeste didn't reply right away. She stepped into the waiting black limousine. As the door closed, sealing off the light from the outside world, she leaned back against the soft leather seat, eyes focused straight ahead. She knew what had happened today wasn't just about her. It was a milestone, a statement made without words, but more powerful than any speech. This was no longer a reaction. It was a reckoning. As the limousine turned out of the airport gates, a flood of emails titled "Emergency Incidents, Flight 917, request for immediate review, lit up the screens at Stratus Air's Geneva headquarters. Within 30 minutes, an emergency meeting was called. Every regional director, legal advisor, head of customer service, and crew manager was required to attend. The meeting notice included a short addendum. Complainant, Celeste Morgan, CEO, Morgan Tech. The moment that name appeared, the atmosphere in the boardroom turned heavy. Celeste Morgan's not just a CEO, not just a VIP passenger. She is a leading voice in the global movement for digital equity and service ethics in the luxury sector. A woman once honored by Time magazine as the cultural reformer of 21st century corporate leadership, and now she stood at the center of an incident that Stratus's own system had allowed to happen. Right there in seat 10A, Charles Edmonds, the current CEO of Stratus Air, known for his reformist mindset and commitment to transparency, sat quietly at the head of the boardroom table. In front of him was a decision that could no longer be delayed. Before Edmonds lay a 23-page document, discrimination report, Flight 907, emergency review, under Global Service Ethics Code. The room fell silent as the large screen lit up. Aliyah Grant, authorized by Morgan Tech, appeared from New York through a secure internal system. She looked directly into the camera, her tone sharp, though devoid of anger. We don't need apologies. Morgan Tech doesn't need hollow promises. We need action. We need confirmation that your system does not tolerate subtle, coded forms of discrimination in any form. No excuses, no deflection. Aliyah paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. Then she played a video clip from the cabin surveillance footage. Becky Whitmore, tray in hand, responded to Celeste in a flat, dismissive tone. Maybe the system didn't update. That happens all the time. Next, a comparison chart appeared, showing service response times in first class, white passengers, average response time 42 seconds. Celeste Morgan, response time 6 minutes, 11 seconds. Meal denied, no explanation. A veteran customer service advisor furrowed his brow and turned to Edmonds. We can't bury this. Edmonds replied, his tone firm. We're not going to. Not because he felt pressured by the name Celeste Morgan, but because he understood this was no longer a personal matter. The very service Stratus had long prided itself on, exclusivity for the elite, had revealed a darker truth. A structure where elite was no longer defined by merit, but by race, gender, and outdated social norms. And the woman in seat 20A, she had drawn the line with clarity. When Aliyah ended the call, Edmonds stood, tapping the table lightly with his fingertips. Effective immediately, the entire Flight 917 crew is suspended. We're launching a full investigation into all flights involving flight attendant Rebecca Whitmore over the past 24 months. He paused, looking each person in the room in the eye. We will issue a public apology to Miss Celeste Morgan. And more than that, I want to invite her to serve as a cultural advisor for Stratus's entire crew training system. The regional director raised an eyebrow. You're letting her rewrite our policies? Edmonds nodded without hesitation. Not letting, we need her to rewrite them. An unprecedented decision. But no one in the room was thinking about old policies anymore, because everyone knew if they didn't act, the name Stratus Air would be forever tied to this scandal, a stain on their luxury brand. Meanwhile, in Geneva, Celeste Morgan sat quietly in her hotel suite, windows opening to a direct view of Lake Geneva. She said nothing. She didn't need to do anything more, because she knew this time the voice wasn't coming from her lips. It was the system that had started correcting itself. On the table before her, a steaming cup of herbal tea. Her laptop screen displayed a new email. Subject line, our deepest apologies for what occurred. Below it, the official message from Stratus Air. We have launched a full-scale investigation. We are honored to invite you to serve on the advisory team for our organizational culture reform. This is not just an honor, it is a responsibility we believe only you are uniquely qualified to undertake. Signed, Charles Edmonds, CEO, Stratus Air. Celeste didn't smile. She simply tapped her fingers 3 times on the tabletop. 3 sharp, deliberate beats. Her eyes turned toward the distant lake. quiet but as deep and reflective as if measuring the tremor of an unfolding earthquake. An earthquake born from a cold sandwich. And now it had forced an entire industry to confront itself. At the same time, the Flight 917 crew exited the aircraft as usual, light steps after a long journey. Becky Whitmore led the group, her high heels clicking against the polished stone floor. Her blonde hair still neatly tied, a smile on her lips that resembled a mask, worn so long she could no longer tell where the mask ended and the truth began. For Becky, the last flight had been nothing special, just another difficult passenger like dozens before. In her mind, Celeste Morgan was just another overly sensitive businesswoman overreacting because she didn't get her lobster bisque or steak. A minor inconvenience. A cold sandwich tray. Blown way out of proportion. That's what Becky thought. But as the crew walked through the door leading to the crew corridor, no one was smiling anymore. There was no red carpet waiting, only a line of people already in place. 3 men in black suits from internal security, 2 senior staff members in Stratosphere uniforms but with red name tags indicating the internal emergency review team, a corporate attorney holding an iPad with the company logo, along with a thick file stamped confidential ethics review. No one in the crew said a word. The bright white lighting hit the marble floor with such intensity that the space felt more like a courtroom than an airport hallway. A woman stepped forward from the line. Slim-build, eyes sharp as blades. Her name? Karen Dufresne, head of global service culture at Stratus. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was cold, clear, and impossible to ignore. Flight 917 crew, please proceed to emergency interview room 2. This session is mandatory under Clause 6.3 of the Global Service Ethics Code. A male flight attendant behind Becky glanced at her, his eyes uncertain. Becky opened her mouth, likely to ask, "What's going on?" But Karen's look shut the question down before it left her lips, because this time the answers weren't hers to give. The list was ready, the files encrypted. They were no longer flight crew finishing a shift. They were now subjects under investigation for serious breaches of professional ethics. They were led through a narrow hallway, 6 separate rooms, 1 for each of them. No phones, no assistants. Each room was equipped with a camera, a senior investigator, and a legal observer. Becky sat upright in the chair. She tried to look composed, but inside chaos was beginning to form. The woman across from her opened a file, eyes scanning each line without lifting her gaze. Ms. Whitmore will be asking a series of questions based on your service behavior on Flight 9 and 17, as well as on other flights over the past 24 months. This interview is being recorded and may be used as evidence in internal disciplinary procedures, including termination should misconduct be verified. Becky swallowed hard. Her lips were dry. The investigator opened a tablet. A video played. It was the exact moment Becky said to Celeste Morgan, "Maybe the system didn't update. That happens all the time." Celeste's face in the video wasn't angry. It was calm. Eerily calm. The kind of calm that made the room colder. Do you recall this interaction? I thought it was, then why were 5 other passengers served their pre-ordered meals, while the passenger in seat 1A was not? I think maybe the system glitched. We checked. The system confirmed her meal order was submitted 7 days in advance and reconfirmed at boarding. You would like to add anything else? Becky couldn't respond. Her eyes darted, unfocused, panicked. She was now facing something she never thought would reach her, real consequences. Every ignored request, every shrug, every dismissive comment, they had all been recorded. Not just in words, but through behavior, through glances, through cameras, through countless silent witnesses who had long grown tired of tolerating it. And this time, the woman in seat 10A was not one to stay silent. At Stratus headquarters in Geneva, Charles Edmond sat alone in conference room 1. In front of him were 3 new reports from the preliminary investigation team. Rebecca Whitmore, recommended for indefinite suspension. Systemic bias, recommend full training program overhaul. This was no longer about individual errors. It was a fracture that had spread, and if not addressed completely, it would destroy the very trust Stratus had built its luxury legacy on. Formal proposal. Appoint Celeste Morgan as independent advisor on diversity and service culture. Charles didn't need to reread it. He knew a new era at Stratus had begun, not because of media pressure, not because of public outrage, but because a woman stepped out of seat 1A with the composure of someone who understood that justice does not need to scream to be heard. Later that afternoon, an internal memo was issued to all Stratus employees worldwide. The subject line was bold, tagged as urgent priority. Response required. Becky Whitmore placed on immediate administrative leave. Comprehensive reform of the service training system to be initiated. The document was personally signed by CEO Charles Edmonds with a rare message from a luxury airline. We acknowledge that subtle discriminatory behaviors were previously overlooked within our internal system. This is the moment Stratus Air must take responsibility and, more importantly, must evolve. At the Geneva HR office, Becky Whitmore sat with her head lowered, hands still clutching her personal report. Her face had gone pale, not because of the suspension, but because she was beginning to realize that what had once been her unspoken norms were now admissible as evidence. Worse, everything had been recorded. Emails that once seemed like harmless office banter were now being flagged and analyzed by the company's internal language monitoring system. Black passengers always think they're the CEO. Babies want attention. I just breeze through it. Had another Michelle Obama today? Bread and water will do. Once, these comments passed through inboxes like tasteless jokes. But now, under legal and cultural review, they were irrefutable proof of a system built on covert discrimination. Not loud, not violent, just a shrug, a dismissive look. And Becky wasn't the only one. Two other flight crew members, including Daniel Klain, who had dodged Celeste's question, were now under behavioral review. Past flights, quiet complaints from minority passengers, instances of accidentally skipping service or ignoring call buttons, all being re-examined. Outside the walls of the airline, the shock waves had begun to ripple. Less than 24 hours after the incident, major headlines began to circulate. The New York Times, Black female CEO discriminated against mid-flight, silence no longer a shield. The Guardian, one denied meal exposes the luxury service industry's hidden reality. Forbes, Celeste Morgan, from target to trailblazer in global service culture reform. In the Washington Post's social justice section, a full 3-page article was published, featuring only one clip from the cabin footage. The moment Celeste said, "No, I understand." Not an accusation, not a revenge play, but an awakening directed at an entire system. It wasn't just a statement, it was a warning from someone who had seen too much. And this time, she wouldn't let it happen again. Before long, a powerful social media movement emerged. The Seat 1A. Thousands shared their stories of being sidelined, ignored, treated as invisible because of their race, gender, or background. At the end of each post, there was only one line. I wasn't in Seat 1A, but I deserve to be respected. Stratus's New York office received over 9,000 emails demanding a review of the company's internal culture. The London Public Affairs Division received formal requests from 3 major investors to host internal workshops on diversity and inclusion. Stratus CEO Charles Edmonds received a direct call from the U.S. Secretary of Transportation demanding an official report on corporate culture across the luxury aviation sector. Celeste didn't need to attend a press conference. She didn't need to fight for a microphone because her actions had already become her voice. In a quiet meeting room at her hotel overlooking Lake Geneva, Celeste sat not with reporters, but with 3 young black women. Each had worked in service roles. Each had been overlooked. Each once believed they had no right to speak up. "We want to learn how to speak up like you," one of them said. Celeste shook her head, her expression serious. "Relief I didn't speak up with words. I let the system speak its own truth, and I made sure it could no longer look away. Outside the window, Lake Geneva remained still as glass, but beneath the surface, the undercurrent was stirring, like the changes that had begun from seat 1A on a flight Becky Whitmore would never forget. Celeste never had to raise her voice, never lost her composure, never bowed her head to be heard, because she understood true power doesn't shout. It arrives at the right moment. A moment, a cold sandwich, a cold stare, a meal withheld, not because it was out of stock, but because the woman in seat ton A wasn't seen as deserving. She didn't slap anyone, didn't argue, didn't stand in the aisle yelling as some effective resistance guides might suggest. She simply nodded and said, "Now I understand." That quiet clarity exposed the system's true face. A system where luxury wasn't about service, but about subtle exclusion. A system that didn't fail loudly, but silently, and often. And this time, silence would no longer protect it. Jokes like, "Black passengers always think they're CEOs," once whispered as internal chatter, were now being exposed to the public. Service data was now visualized in graphs. Emails long buried in archives now surfaced as evidence. And all of it had been brought to light by someone who never once raised her voice. 3 days after the incident, StratosAir held a press conference in Geneva, attended by dozens of major media outlets. For the first time in the company's history, they invited a guest speaker who wasn't part of the executive board, Celeste Morgan. She stepped onto the stage in an ivory suit. No metallic accents, no flashy logos, only a small blackbird pin on her lapel, the symbol of the Seat 1A Alliance, a coalition she co-founded with African women leaders to fight for equity in luxury service industries. There was no prepared speech, no media team behind her. Celeste simply held the microphone, her voice clear, steady, each word piercing through the polished surface of the high-end aviation industry. "I didn't come here to be angry. I didn't come here to play the role of the typical victim. I'm here because there are still far too many people sitting in seat 34F or by the restroom, treated as unworthy simply because of the color of their skin, their accent, or their inability to pronounce the names of the wines on the menu." She looked directly at the Stratus representatives, not to accuse, but to let the truth speak for itself. "I wasn't asking for a meal. I was asking for a system that doesn't exclude me simply because I don't look like the passengers who are usually expected to sit in seat 1A. She spoke of Becky Whitmore. Without ever mentioning her name, she spoke of how flight attendants could remember the names of 3 white male passengers, but referred to her only as the guest. She spoke of what it feels like to be seen, but not acknowledged. And she stopped. The overhead lighting shifted from cool white to warm amber. The room fell silent. No one moved. No more words were needed. After the press conference, sweeping reforms were launched at Stratus. 100% of flight attendants were required to complete mandatory training in unconscious bias and equity in luxury service. A direct feedback channel was created for VIP passengers, with a rapid response team dedicated to cultural accountability. Celeste Morgan was formally invited to serve as strategic advisor for the Redefining Luxury Initiative, a global effort to bring equity to premium service sectors. Becky Whitmore, once the unspoken model of standard service, had become a living symbol of a system that had run smoothly for years on the silence of the marginalized. Bloomberg's cover headline read, "Where less didn't need to speak. A CEO reshapes an industry with a single look." The subtitle read, and with one sentence, "Now I understand." That night, Celeste declined all interview requests. She quietly hung up on CNN, BBC, and every major news outlet, because she knew what needed to be said had already been spoken. She didn't need to add anything more, because the system itself had revealed its truth. On the hotel balcony, Celeste looked out over the still surface of Lake Geneva. A young assistant stepped outside, ready to share the latest round of positive shareholder responses. But Celeste gently raised her hand to stop her. "I don't need feedback," she said. "I just need this system to never fall asleep again." And to her, that was the true victory. An internal memo from Stratus Air headquarters landed in the inboxes of over 22,000 employees worldwide. Immediate suspension of employee Becky Whitmore. Launch of comprehensive service training reform program. The document was signed directly by CEO Charles Edmonds, accompanied by a rare statement from a high-end airline. "We acknowledge that subtle discriminatory behaviors have previously been overlooked within our internal system. This is the moment for Stratus to take responsibility, and more importantly, to change." At the HR office in Geneva, Becky Whitmore sat with her head bowed, still clutching her personal file. Her face was pale, not because of the suspension, but because she was beginning to realize everything she once thought of as normal was now evidence. Worse, everything had been recorded. Emails that once passed through the hallways as casual jokes were now being scrutinized word by word by the internal language monitoring system. Black passengers always act like their CEO. People of color always want attention. I just get it over with. Add another Michelle Obama clone today. Bread and water should do. Once those words drifted by like air. But now, under legal and organizational lenses, they were undeniable proof of a covert system of discrimination. No shouting, just a shrug, just a dismissive look, and Becky was not alone. Two other crew members, including Daniel Klein, who had deflected Celeste's question, were also placed under behavioral review. Past flights, quiet complaints from minority passengers, moments when service was accidentally skipped or call buttons went unanswered. All were being reopened, but the aftershocks had already breached the walls of Stratus. Less than 24 hours after the incident, major outlets began to report. The New York Times: Black female CEO faces discrimination mid-flight. Power is no longer silent. The Guardian: one denied meal exposes the hidden face of luxury service. Forbes: Celeste Morgan from Target to pioneer in global service culture reform. In the Washington Post's social justice section, a 3-page feature ran, anchored by a now viral video. One simple sentence: "Now I understand." Not an accusation, not an act of vengeance, but a declaration from someone who had seen it all and would not let it happen again. Soon after, the social media campaign Seat 1A began to spread with force. Thousands of people shared their stories of being overlooked, pushed aside, made to feel invisible because of their race, gender, or background. And at the end of every post, there was just one line: "I wasn't in Seat 1A, but I deserve respect." At Stratus's New York office, more than 9,000 emails poured in, demanding a cultural overhaul. The London Office of Public Affairs received official requests from 3 major investors to organize internal diversity and equity workshops. Meanwhile, CEO Charles Edmonds received a direct call from the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, requesting a formal report on the state of corporate culture within luxury aviation. Celeste didn't need to attend any press conferences. She didn't need to fight for the right to speak, because her actions had become her voice. In a small hotel meeting room by Lake Geneva, Celeste sat with 3 young black women. They weren't journalists or executives, but former service workers, women who had been dismissed, who had once believed they had no right to speak. "We want to learn how to speak up like you," one of them said. Celeste shook her head, her gaze steady. "I didn't speak with words. I let the system speak its own truth, and I made sure that this time it could no longer look away." Outside the glass window, Lake Geneva was still as a mirror, but deep beneath the surface, currents had already begun to shift. Like the wave of change that started in Seat 1A on a flight Becky Whitmore would never forget. When Stratus Air officially launched the first-class service culture reform program, which mandated sweeping, non-negotiable changes, Celeste had already left Geneva, quietly returning to the U.S. 3 days earlier. No press briefings, no farewell speeches, no bouquets or standing ovations. She never needed them. She never needed the spotlight to prove she belonged. What she left behind wasn't on front pages, wasn't in the praises of other CEOs. It was a new standard. True power doesn't need to be loud. It just needs the right action at the right moment. In that moment, a flight attendant call button, a question about a denied meal, a message sent to her assistant. Simple acts, yet enough to bring an entire system to its knees and force it to change. The behaviors others dismissed as oversensitive or overreacting had become the quiet beginning of a revolution in luxury service. And from that day forward, every time a black passenger entered first class, whether a CEO, an artist, a social activist, or a single mother flying luxury for the first time, they would no longer be looked at as foreign in a space never meant for them, because no one would know who might be sitting in seat 1A. It could be a CEO, an investor, a founder of a global tech platform, or perhaps it's simply someone strong enough not to bow to discrimination, even when it's disguised in a crisp white napkin and a standard service smile. At the Morgan Tech office, on a quiet weekend afternoon, Celeste sat writing a letter by hand, a rare act in an age of emails and instant messaging. She used blue ink on clean white paper, her handwriting as steady and precise as the strategic thinking that built her name. But this letter wasn't addressed to the CEO of Stratus, not to the board of directors, not to the press. It was for a 16-year-old girl in Florida who had written to Celeste after reading her story in Forbes. In her letter, the girl shared, "My career counselor said that people like me should stick to hospitality. Tech is probably out of reach." In response, Celeste wrote, "Some people will think you don't belong in places they've never seen someone like you enter. Don't get angry. Just remember, you don't have to be loud to prove anything. You just have to show up at the right moment and never back down." And at the very end, she added, "Don't forget, you have every right to sit in seat 1A. If they say no, ask them, who was this system designed for?" Months later, at a global summit on equity in service industries, an opening video played on the main screen, a shot of Celeste seated in first class with a cold sandwich tray in front of her. No narration, just soft background music. The clip was recreated from a passenger's perspective, the same viral footage that had been shared over 20 million times under the hashtag Seat1A. The auditorium, filled with hotel CEOs, airline executives, and industry leaders, fell silent because everyone understood this was never about the meal. It was about a service attitude shaped by prejudice. It was about the absence of resistance in the past and the timely presence of a woman who had once been treated as invisible. That fall, Celeste Morgan boarded a flight from Atlanta to Cape Town, an honored speaker at the Global Leadership Forum. She didn't request special treatment. She didn't drop her name with the ground staff. But when she stepped into the first-class cabin, she noticed something she had never seen before. A small sign placed at seat 1A, engraved with elegant lettering, "Reserved for change." And beneath it, 3 simple words, "We remember you." Celeste smiled softly. No words were needed. She sat down, buckled her seatbelt. The aircraft began to taxi. The sky was still blue, but now it felt wider, because there was finally space for those who had long been told, "You don't belong here." Denied meal, a cold stare, a seemingly small act, had exposed an entire system of discrimination veiled beneath the glamour of luxury. Celeste Morgan never shouted, never demanded, never sought revenge. She simply and quietly made an entire industry confront itself. And from that moment on, nothing was ever the same. Her story is a reminder we don't need to shout to be heard. We just need to act at the right moment. Have you ever been overlooked in a space where you deserve to be seen? Would you stay silent or speak up? Share your story in the comments below. We're listening. If this story gave you something to reflect on, tap like, share it to spread the message, and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey of inspiration. Because sometimes all it takes to change a system is one person sitting in the right seat.